with regards to Shabbos and Torah portion. And that's because this week we're able to combine Shabbos and Torah portion. That's because of the word Noach. The word Noach, Noah, has within it a lot of Shabbos-related content. And we're going to address that in a little bit. But I wanted to just start out that, for many, this is a very epic tale, the story of Noah, the story of the flood. And wanted to look at, some of the underpinning of the Noah story. When the question is raised, why was there a flood? The answer usually has to do with people were doing the wrong thing. I always like to say this was a reboot of the universe. It was time for a software upgrade, right? Just like you go from 12.0 to 13.0 in your iOS software. We have something similar here. We have something similar here as well, and that's the story of the flood. But there are two verses which. One in our partial, one in last week, which give us a little bit of an additional insight, and that has to do with the idea of the yetzer hara, the idea that the flood was about man's inability to control their desires, their urges, their evil nature. And the yetzer hara as a concept is something that has a large place in the Jewish tradition. The yetzer hara is, in some ways, just the idea of desire and the idea of negative motivation, and it is our lack of control or lack of patience and the like. But the yetzer hara has a large spiritual literature as to what exactly is the yetzer hara. Interestingly enough, when they talk about a bar bat mitzvah coming of age, it's because that's when the child gets their yetzer hara. It's not when they get their good inclination; it's when they get their bad inclination. Because responsibility is ultimately something that's binding when you have a competing desire. So that's the idea of the yetzer hara. And if we look in the text with regards to the yetzer hara appears after the flood, when there's a discussion, when God ultimately wants, says, Noah brings the offering and they come out, and God makes a deal with the people, creates a covenant connected ultimately to the rainbow that there will never be another flood. And in chapter 8, verse 21, putting the verse into the chat, that God sees. God sees what has happened. He smells the scent of the offering and said, Hashem speaks to himself. It's sort of interesting, God talking to himself. It's certainly a very anthropomorphic image, but that's the way the text is. And God says, Lo osif l'kalel odes ha'adama bavor adam. No longer going to curse the earth. Not going to doom the earth because of man. Ki yetzer leiv ha'adam ra min urav. Because look, I know man's nature is evil from youth, so therefore I'm not going to destroy every living being as I have done. It's almost man is bad, God destroys the world, and God says, look, man is bad, I can't destroy the world. Which is seems a little bit fickle on God's part. But if we were to unpack this verse, what is God ultimately saying? Man makes mistakes. I can't get so upset and destroy the world every time that man makes a mistake, because they'll always be destroying the world, and that's no good. So therefore, I'm not going to destroy the world anymore. Okay, makes sense, right? Anyone have major opposition to this statement by God? Right, we're okay with it. And not just because God says it, it kind of makes sense also, right? Great. So this would be fine, except if we go a couple chapters back. This was in chapter 8, verse 21. If we go back to chapter 6, verses 5 through 7, this is the end of Parshat Bereshit. This is the end where ultimately, this is where God decides to destroy the world and save only Noah. This is where Noah makes his appearance, as God is going to, be kind and save Noah. And we encounter now also in the chat verses 5, 6, and 7, right? God sees that the Ra'ayar Hashem ki rabba ra'as ha'adam ba'aretz. God sees how great was man's wickedness on earth. V'chol yetzer machshavos libao rak ra kol hayom. God sees that man's wickedness on earth and how every living, how every plan devised by man was nothing but evil. So what do we see in this verse again? Yetzer hara. God sees that man has a yetzer hara. So what does God decide to do? He's upset. He regretted creating man. And he says, what am I going to do? I'm going to blot out human beings from the earth. I regret that I made man. So here, God is saying, human beings have a yetzer hara. So what am I going to do? Destroy human beings. God says the flood destroys human beings, destroys everything, and afterwards says, I'm not going to destroy everything. Why? Because man has a yetzer hara. It's a little bit, God destroys the world because man has a yetzer hara, and God just says that he's not going to destroy the world because man has a yetzer hara. If we're seeing it a little bit as God being fickle, when the story's over, now it's man has yetzer hara, I'm going to destroy the world. Oh, I destroyed the world, but man has a yetzer hara, so I'm not going to destroy the world later on. What is that? What's at play here? What's going on with the God's with the yetzer hara here? What kind of yetzer hara leads to the destruction of the world, and what kind of yetzer hara leads to the world never being destroyed again? What's the difference in the yetzer hara? So one explanation can be found in the language of these verses. In chapter 6, God says that what does he recognize that man has? Ki yetzer v'chol yetzer machshavos libo rak ra. All of man's desire all man has is yetzer hara. And later on, when God finishes destroying the world and sees that Noah brings an offering, then God says, well, human beings have within them from their youth this evil inclination, but I'm not going to destroy the world. What did God see? The difference is in the fact that God saw Noah's actions. God saw that what did Noah do afterwards? He offered a sacrifice. He sees within human beings the possibility for terrible evil, and also sees within human beings the possibility for good. And this relates to the fact that when we talk about the book of Genesis, and it is the pre-Jewish description, right? There's no Sinai. Well, people always talk about how Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the patriarchs and matriarchs, were Jewish. They weren't Jewish. There were no Jews until Sinai. So how do we understand what was going on at this time? It was there was some spirituality. And ultimately, when God destroyed the world, whatever glimpses of human potential and even human positive potential and spirituality were not enough to stop God from destroying the world. You think about Adam. Adam had one mitzvah to keep. They blew it, Adam and Chava. You didn't have you didn't have a demonstrable track record to show that there was something to combat or something to counteract the yetzer hara. The attitude was one of more of exclusive yetzer hara. However, by the time you get to the necessary reboot and the system upgrade and the destruction of the flood, and afterwards Noah's behavior, you begin to see that couched within all of the negative, evil inclination, yetzer hara, there's that possibility for good. So, for example, when Noah was going into the ark, it says that he took from the animals, but he distinguished between animals that were tameh and animals that were tahor, impure animals and pure animals. So all of a sudden you have the beginning that human beings pay attention to things which are more spiritually appropriate and things which are spiritually inappropriate. We read about the possibility, we see later on about when Rivka has the twins and isn't sure what to do and what's going on inside her. What does she do? Vatelech lidrosh et Hashem. She seeks God. Even before the destruction, we had glimpses of individuals who strove to transcend man's evil nature and get close to God. So, for example, the biblical character we read about last week, Chanoch, Enoch, that Vayithaleh Chanoch El Hashem v'einenu, ki lakachoso Elohim. Chanoch disappears, he goes up to heaven because God takes him. There is this possibility of human beings transcending the evil inclination and seeking something higher and more holy. At the end of chapter 6 in Bereshit, God sees the fact that those must only be exceptions, but ultimately that kol yetzer ra, rak ra. The initial way when we look at human beings may be that it's all bad and the transcendent moments are only the exception and the world doesn't deserve to exist. However, there's a reconsideration, whether it's Noah's behavior, whether it's just a natural progression of looking at how human beings developed. God says, yeah, they have yetzer lev adam ra minu rav. They have this hardwiring for making the wrong decisions that keeps them grounded on the external and grounded on the superficial and grounded on the impure and grounded on the secular and the profane. However, there's that possibility of transcendence. And it's sometimes a little bit troubling to look at this as God changing God's mind, right? And the Torah says that in Genesis 6:6 it says, "Vayinachem Hashem," God regretted. At the same time, I think that a more productive way of looking at this, besides getting caught up in God changing the mind, is that there's sometimes a progression when we look at the potential that we have, that human beings have. It can start with, yes, we have, we're all hardwired for the wrong decisions, and good decisions are the exception to the rule. Or recognize that we might have a physical existence and desires that keep us anchored on the ground, but we do have that possibility of transcending. The possibility to transcend the yetzer hara to make the right choices, the tahor choices, the kadosh, the holy choices, the more selfless choices and the like. And so what we see under discussion between Bereshit 6 and Bereshit 8 is a helpful presentation of what the yetzer hara, the evil inclination, is. The evil inclination can come as it did in Bereshit 6 to define human beings. They're all terrible. Kol yetzer libo rak kol hayom. It's all bad, and sometimes it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we continue to negatively reinforce, that's how it can play out, and it blinds us to the exceptions. Right, as we pointed out, there were exceptions in terms of proper and more transcendent behavior. However, in the upgrade, in the reboot that takes place after the flood, Noah emerges, brings a sacrifice. God realizes that it's not a hardwiring that forces human beings to stay anchored in their yetzer hara. No, there is a yetzer hara. There is a yetzer hara. The yetzer of the person is ra minu rav. We are hardwired. We do have within us the preponderance of making the bad decisions. However, that's not worthy of destroying the world, because there's also the possibility of transcendence. And so it gives us insight into the flow and the order of the world, the way God progresses from Genesis 6 through 8, and then ultimately Avraham begins that upward climb towards human beings fulfilling more of the godly potential. But it's also, something that emerges that can teach us a lesson about the idea of yetzer hara. It is possible for the yetzer hara to define us and for us to think of ourselves as beholden to the yetzer hara. At the same time, even God recognizes that that's not the case. And even if we think that's the case and people make decisions that reinforce that, that is not the case, and we can transcend that, and the world will not be destroyed, and there's a covenant, and there's a continuity and an upward spiral. This actually connects to an idea. Yesterday was the yahrzeit, the 77th yahrzeit of the Rav Kalonymus Kalman Shapiro, the PSS and the Rebbe. I've spoken about before, the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto, a very charismatic figure in the world of pre-war Polish Hasidus. Also a trailblazer and trendsetter when it came to education. A lot of his writings have to do with educating students, and his yeshiva was known for being a place that could bring out the best in students. And one of the reasons why is that he had a teaching, and this is something that was shared by Sivan Rahav Meir, educator and journalist in Israel. Hat tip to Larry Baruch for forwarding it to me. The idea that he reminds the teacher that the role of the teacher is to reinforce within the student that the student is ultimately responsible for their own for their own progress. The idea of empowering the student, the idea of reinforcing within the student, positive reinforcement that they have the possibility, they have the capability on their own of achieving greatness. And that's, I think, a parallel message to what we're seeing here this morning. That yes, it seems that the early behavior in the aftermath of creation may have led even God to, in a sense, give up on human beings. But at the end of the day, God realizes that God cannot give up on human beings, and certainly we cannot give up on human beings. And that is an important personal development principle, and a very important educational principle, and a religious principle. Wanted to then just shift gears for a minute as we hope to discuss Parsha and Shabbos and more inspirational spiritual thoughts each Friday morning. That Noach and Shabbos come together, and that has to do with the fact that Noach is described as by his father Lemech in Genesis, in Bereshit 5:29, as when he is born. Lemech says about Noach, and I'll post it into the chat so you can see the verse inside, that he calls his name Noach Zeyinachamenu mimasenu meitzvon yadenu. Noach is going to provide relief. Noach is going to provide comfort. Noach is going to be able to be a transitional figure in the downward spiral of humanity, and will transition to the upward spiral of human history. And another translation that's used by other translators is that Zeyin Achamenu, this will provide us rest. And in this case, Noach is related to the word rest. And the Rashi explains here that what Lemech had in mind is that Noach will begin to make things easy for human beings, right? Because after the sin of the tree of knowledge, the earth had been cursed, and now Noah's birth is going to lead to the lifting of that curse. Because if you follow the timeline, we're now 1,000 years into human history. Adam is dying. So hopefully the curse is ending and there will be more rest. And there's that element of progress in human condition. So this idea of Noach's name being connected with rest, it's no surprise that the Zohar, Jewish mysticism, links the idea of Noach to Shabbos. And the idea of Shabbos and Noach and rest, and the idea that in Jewish mysticism and Hasidic philosophy, rest is of a spiritual nature, puts Noach into the discussion when we're talking about Shabbos. For example, when we sing on Shabbos the song Yom Shabboson, we sing Yona Matzah Voma Noach V'Sham Yanucha Yigiei Koach. Right? You're familiar with the song? Yona Matzah Voma Noach Ay 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 V'Sham Yanucha Yigiei Koach. So that's the dove found rest from all of its all of its difficult activity. And that's the song is about Shabbos. So what are we talking about? Yonah's dove on Shabbos. And so the explanation is that Noach and Shabbos have this essential connection. The idea of finding rest and what's the connection? So there is an understanding. It's various Hasidic commentaries have the understanding that in a way the ark was it can be compared to Shabbos. The experience on the ark is similar to Shabbos. It's the ark is riding on the turbulent waves of what's taking place outside, and the ark is a sanctuary from all of the complications and complexity and difficulties of the outside world. It remains a sanctuary from everything which is difficult. In a way, Shabbos has that type of an element as well. It's a sanctuary in time. It's a sanctuary from the everyday. The concept that after navigating a chaotic and unpredictable week, Shabbos is something that we know what happens on Shabbos. And that's the idea. We disengage from the weekday activities. That's why when we talk about work on Shabbos, we're not necessarily talking about physical labor. We're talking about removing our involvement from controlling the world and to just let things be. And this is the idea of the concept that Noach, whose name, who was called Noach because his name represents the possibility of rest entering the world, teaches us a lot about Shabbos, the experience on the ark, the idea of even the dove finding rest after the weariness of flying around. There's this idea that Noach in the ark represents Shabbos within the chaos of the rest of the week. And the Slonim Rebbe in particular looks at the idea that within Shabbos, there's another comparison with the ark. So the ark had 3 levels. And so the way the Slonim Rebbe understands the ark having 3 levels is that the upper level represents thought, the middle level represents speech, and the lower level represents actions. And this is a larger Hasidic spiritual idea that we have machshava, dibur, ma'aseh. Right at the top, in the farthest removed from activity, is the realm of thought and spirit. Then we sometimes articulate that thought and spirit with words, and then we get down and dirty with regards to actions. And it's a progression. And so the Slonim Rebbe looks at this with regards to Shabbos in the fact that Shabbos has the actions, it has the speech, and it has the thought, and that in a sense, there's a need to try and observe Shabbos on all levels. In the realm of action, we have Kiddush and Motzi and food, but there's also the realm of speech, prayer and Zmirot, words of Torah. And there's also the realm of thought in terms of the mindset that we have on Shabbos. And so when Lemech named Noach because Ze Yenachamenu, Noach will introduce rest into the world, there was the hope that Noach would be able to move beyond Adam. And maybe Lemech had a very technical understanding of this in hopes that now it'll get easier to farm. But really where it went is that Noach took the world in a very different direction. Whether it was his actions or certainly it was during his lifetime and his experience that there was the recognition that human beings do have the ability to transcend being mired in the depths of the yetzer hara and it transcending to the realms of more spiritual and holy pursuits. And then also this idea of Noach introducing the concept of rest and reinforcing the idea of Shabbos, which was part of creation, but no, the idea of Shabbos as a sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world, whether it be in terms of scheduling and practically, or whether it be in the realm of activity or how we speak and the mindset that we have. Noach represents that type of Shabbos, and that ultimately that's the goal that we have for Shabbos. And we see that in the way we practice Shabbos, in the laws of Shabbos, and also in the soul and spirit of Shabbos. And so in a way, what we've been looking at this morning is the critical role that Noach plays in transitioning human beings from being more stuck to their more base and evil natures, and reminding us that we can transcend. And we see that reflected in all areas of life, but in particular, what Shabbos represents. And hopefully each of us will, with that, on that note, enjoy a Shabbos of all three levels, the actions, the speech, and the thoughts, and have a mindset. This Shabbos, like every Shabbos, should be a sanctuary in time in a very chaotic world. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom.